Princess Zarathiel stood on the bridge of her massive warship and watched the small blue planet slowly turn below them. Earth looked peaceful from space with its white clouds and green lands. She had seen many worlds like this one during her 200 years of life. Most of them surrendered quickly when they saw the power of the Valdorian Empire. Earth would be no different. The princess was tall and elegant with silver skin that seemed to glow under the bridge lights. Her long white hair was pulled back in the traditional style of Valdorian royalty. Her purple eyes showed no emotion as she studied the tactical displays. This was how her people lived. They controlled their feelings and made decisions based on logic alone. It had made them the strongest empire in the galaxy. Her fleet of 300 ships surrounded the planet. Each ship was 10 times larger than anything the humans had built. The Valdorians had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had barely left their home system. This should be an easy victory. Captain Jake Martinez sat in the command chair of his ship, the New Horizon, and tried not to think about how badly things were going. Half of Earth's defense fleet was already destroyed. The alien ships were too fast and too strong. Their weapons cut through human shields like they were made of paper. His own ship had taken heavy damage and was running on backup power. Jake was a tall man with dark hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting in space for 15 years and had never seen anything like these aliens. They moved their ships with perfect coordination. They never made mistakes. They fought like machines instead of living beings. His communications officer turned to face him. "Sir, we're receiving another message from the alien flagship. They want to talk." "Put it through," Jake said. The main screen filled with the image of an alien woman. She was beautiful in a cold way that reminded Jake of a statue. When she spoke, her voice was calm and precise. "I am Princess Zarathiel of the Valdorian Empire. Your resistance has been noted, but it is pointless. Surrender now, and your people will be given fair treatment under our rule. Continue to fight, and we will be forced to destroy all life on your planet." Jake stood up slowly. Around him, his crew waited to see what he would say. They all knew the situation was hopeless. The aliens had more ships, better weapons, and technology that seemed like magic. Any reasonable person would surrender. "Princess," Jake said with a slight smile, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to pass. You see, we humans have this bad habit of not knowing when to quit." Zarathiel's perfect face showed a tiny frown. "Captain, you must understand that your defeat is certain. We have studied your military capabilities. You cannot win this battle." "You're probably right," Jake agreed. "But here's the thing about humans. Sometimes we do things that don't make sense. Sometimes we fight even when we know we're going to lose." The princess stared at him for a long moment. In all her years of conquest, she had never met a species that would choose certain death over logical surrender. "Captain, I do not understand your reasoning. Please explain why you would sacrifice your lives for no purpose." Jake looked around at his crew. They were young and scared, but none of them looked like they wanted to give up. Lieutenant Amy Foster, at the weapons station, gave him a small nod. Sergeant Ben Clark, at communications, straightened in his chair. These people trusted him to make the right choice, even when there was no right choice to make. "Princess," Jake said, "let me ask you something. Have you ever had something worth fighting for? Something worth dying for? Something more important than your own life?" Zarathiel considered the question. The Valdorian Empire was worth preserving, but only because it was logical and efficient. Her own life had value because she served the Empire well. But die for something beyond logic? The concept made no sense to her. "I do not understand," she said finally. "I didn't think you would," Jake replied. "Communications closed the channel and signaled all ships. We're going to ram that flagship, His crew moved quickly to follow orders. The princess might not understand, but they did. Sometimes you had to make a stand, even when you couldn't win. Sometimes the only choice left was to go down fighting. On the alien flagship, Zarathiel watched in amazement as the human ship suddenly changed course. Instead of retreating or trying to escape, they were flying straight at her vessel. Her tactical officer reported that the lead ship was on a collision course and showed no signs of changing direction. They must be malfunctioning, one of her advisors said. No rational being would attempt such a suicidal attack. But Zarathiel was beginning to understand that humans might not be rational in the way her people understood the word. She watched the human ship grow larger on the screen as it approached at maximum speed. At the last second, she almost ordered her ship to move, but curiosity held her in place. The new horizon struck the flagship's shield generators with tremendous force. The explosion lit up space like a small star. Jake's ship was destroyed instantly, but the collision overloaded the Valdorian shields. Suddenly, the massive alien vessel was vulnerable. The remaining human ships immediately focused all their fire on the flagship. Weapons that had barely scratched the shields now punched deep holes in the alien hull. Emergency alarms sounded throughout. The Valdorian fleet, as their seemingly invincible command ship, began to burn. Princess Zarathiel found herself thrown to the deck as her ship shook from multiple impacts. As she pulled herself upright, she felt something she had not experienced in decades. Surprise. These humans had actually hurt her. They had sacrificed their leader and damaged her flagship through sheer stubborn determination. For the first time in her long life, she wondered if there might be something to learn from these strange illogical creatures. 3 hours after the collision, both ships drifted helplessly in space. The new horizon was a twisted wreck with most of its hull torn away. The Valdorian flagship had managed to contain the damage, but its main engines were offline, and many sections were sealed due to hull breaches. Jake Martinez woke up in what used to be the ship's medical bay. His head hurt and his left arm was broken, but he was alive. Around him, he could see other survivors from his crew. Dr. Lisa Parker was treating the wounded with whatever supplies she could find. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat against a bulkhead with bandages wrapped around her head. How many? Jake asked quietly. 43 survivors out of 300, Amy replied. The rest of the fleet pulled back when they saw what happened to us. Jake nodded slowly. He had known the ramming attack would probably kill him and most of his crew. The fact that anyone survived was better than he had expected. Through a cracked viewport, he could see alien shuttles moving between the two ships. It would not be long before they were captured. Princess Zarathiel watched the boarding operation from her damaged bridge. Her soldiers were professionals who knew how to secure prisoners without unnecessary violence. The humans would be brought aboard and held until the fleet could return to Valdorian space. Standard procedure called for interrogation followed by execution or slavery, depending on their value. But these were not standard prisoners. These humans had done something no enemy had ever done before. They had damaged her flagship through a suicide attack that defied all military logic. She wanted to understand how their minds worked. The boarding teams reported finding only 43 human survivors. Most were injured, but none tried to resist capture. This also puzzled the princess. Defeated enemies usually either fought to the death or begged for mercy. These humans simply waited calmly to be taken prisoner. When the prisoners were brought aboard, Zarathiel went to see them in the holding area. She expected to find broken beings consumed by grief or rage. Instead, she found Jake Martinez sitting on the floor playing cards with his crew, using pieces of torn metal fashioned into a makeshift deck. "Captain," she said as she entered the cell area, "I am surprised to find you in such good spirits." Jake looked up from his cards and smiled slightly. "Princess, thanks for the hospitality. The accommodations are a bit sparse, but we've stayed in worse places." This response confused her even more. "Captain, you do realize that you and your crew are prisoners of war. Your ship has been destroyed, and your planet will soon fall to our forces. Why are you not distressed by this situation?" Jake set down his improvised cards and stood up slowly. His broken arm hung in a sling made from torn fabric. "Well, Princess, that's an interesting question. I suppose it's because being upset won't change anything. We're here now, so we might as well make the best of it." Zarathiel studied his face carefully. Her people were trained to read emotions and detect deception, but Jake seemed genuinely calm. "Captain, I must confess that your behavior puzzles me. In my experience, defeated enemies either despair or rage. You seem to accept your fate with unusual composure." "Maybe that's because we don't see this as our fate," Jake replied. "We see this as just another day in a long war. Sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose, but the war keeps going either way." The princess walked closer to the force field that contained the prisoners. "But surely you understand that your cause is hopeless. Earth cannot stand against the might of the Valdorian Empire. Your sacrifice has gained nothing." Jake exchanged glances with his crew members. Amy Foster was listening carefully, while Dr. Parker continued to tend to the wounded. "Princess, can I ask you something? When was the last time you fought for something you believed in?" "I fight for the Empire," Zarathiel replied automatically. "The Valdorian Empire brings order and efficiency to chaotic worlds. It is logical to support such a system." "That's not what I meant," Jake said. "I mean, when did you last fight for something that made your heart race? Something that mattered so much you would die for it, even if dying wouldn't help?" The question made Zarathiel uncomfortable. Valdorians were taught to suppress such emotional responses. Fighting for abstract concepts like belief or passion was considered primitive and inefficient. "Captain, such motivations are illogical. One should fight only when victory is possible and beneficial." Jake smiled again, and this time there was sadness in his expression. "Princess, I think that's the difference between us. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for, whether you win or lose." Over the next several days, Zarathiel found herself returning to the holding area more often than necessary. Officially, she was conducting interrogations to learn about human military tactics. In reality, she was trying to understand these strange beings who seemed to operate by completely different rules. She watched Jake organize his fellow prisoners, not to plan an escape, but simply to maintain order and morale. He made sure everyone got equal shares of food and water. He settled disputes fairly and kept the group's spirits up with stories and jokes. When one of the wounded prisoners took a turn for the worse, Jake stayed by his side all night, offering what comfort he could. "Why do you care so much for your subordinates?" she asked him during one of their daily conversations. "They cannot help you now. Showing weakness by caring for the wounded serves no strategic purpose." Jake was helping Dr. Parker change bandages on a burned crewman. He did not look up as he answered, "Princess, these people followed me into battle, knowing they might die. The least I can do is make sure they're treated with dignity now. It's not about strategy. It's about honor." "Honor," Zarathiel repeated the word carefully. "This is another concept I do not fully understand. How does honor benefit you in your current situation?" "It doesn't," Jake admitted. "But that's not why we do it. We do it because it's right. Because treating people well is important even when no one is watching. Because the way you act when you've lost everything is what shows who you really are." That night, Zarathiel stood alone on her damaged bridge and thought about the human captain's words. She had conquered dozens of worlds and defeated countless enemies, but she had never met anyone like Jake Martinez. He and his crew had lost everything, yet they seemed more at peace than she felt, despite her victory. For the first time in her long life, the princes began to wonder if the Valdorian way of thinking might be missing something important. Something these primitive humans understood that her advanced civilization had forgotten. As the days passed, Princess Zarathiel found that her interrogation sessions with Jake Martinez had become the most interesting part of her day. She told herself this was for military intelligence, but deep down she knew she was learning things that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy. Today, Jake was telling her about the battle for Luna Station, which had happened just before the main invasion fleet arrived. Lieutenant Amy Foster was commanding the defense platform when her entire unit was killed in the first attack. She could have evacuated with the civilians, but instead she stayed at her post for 3 days, holding off wave after wave of your scout ships. Zarathiel looked at the young woman sitting nearby. Amy had recovered from her head injuries and was quietly listening to their conversation. Lieutenant Foster, why did you not retreat when your position became untenable? What tactical advantage did you gain by remaining? Amy looked up with clear eyes. There wasn't any tactical advantage, ma'am. But those civilian transports needed time to escape, and someone had to buy it for them. It seemed like the right thing to do. But you must have known that your sacrifice would only delay the inevitable, the princess pressed. We would have captured the station eventually, regardless of your actions. Maybe, Amy agreed. But those extra 3 days meant that 5,000 civilians made it to the outer colonies instead of being captured. 5,000 people got to see their families. Again, because we held the line. That seems worth it to me. Zarathiel felt that strange sensation again. Something inside her chest that she could not name or understand. These humans spoke of sacrifice as if it was natural and necessary. They acted as if protecting others was more important than their own survival. Jake continued his story. Then, there was Sergeant Ben Clark. During the evacuation of New Angeles, he carried wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire. The medical reports said he made 17 trips into the combat zone to bring out people who couldn't walk. He was wounded 4 times, but kept going until everyone was accounted for. That is tactically unsound, Zarathiel observed. One soldier, risking his life repeatedly for soldiers who were already combat ineffective, makes no logical sense. The resources expended outweigh the potential gains. Jake studied her face carefully. Princess, when you look at Ben, do you see resources and potential gains? When you look at any of us, do you see anything besides numbers in a tactical equation? The question caught her off guard. When she looked at the human prisoners, she saw enemy combatants who posed no current threat. She saw sources of information about human capabilities. She saw problems to be managed until they could be disposed of properly. But Jake seemed to be asking about something else entirely. I see captured enemies, she said finally. What else should I see? People, Jake said simply. Individuals with hopes and dreams and families they love. Beings who chose to fight, not because someone ordered them to, but because they believed it was right. When Ben carried those wounded soldiers to safety, he wasn't thinking about tactical advantages. He was thinking about saving his friends. Over the following days, Jake told her more stories. Dr. Lisa Parker, who had stayed behind on a doomed space station to ensure civilian evacuation ships could launch safely. Commander Mark Wilson, who had rammed his damaged fighter into an alien cruiser to protect a hospital ship. Captain Susan Brooks, who had held a defensive position for 8 hours alone after her entire company was killed. Each story puzzled Zarathiel more than the last. These humans fought and died for abstract concepts like duty and love and honor. They made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They valued the lives of others more than their own survival. By every measure of Valdorian thinking, they should have been weak and ineffective. Yet they had fought harder than any enemy the princess had ever faced. They had damaged her flagship and forced her fleet to take heavy casualties. Even now, as prisoners, they maintained their dignity and their loyalty to each other. There was strength in their apparent weakness that she could not understand. "Jake," she said during one of their conversations. She had begun using his first name without realizing it. "Help me understand something. Your people know they cannot defeat the Valdorian Empire. Your technology is inferior, and your numbers. Yet you continue to resist. Why do you not say we are stronger and submit to our rule?" Jake, a long moment. Around them, the other continued their daily routines. Amy, the younger crew members, a card game. On the wounded. Ben Clark was telling John who would listen. Jake said finally. The question seemed completely conversation. "I have observed times the rotation of planets, patterns of light and darkness. What does this have to do with military resistance?" "What I meant," Jake replied with a smile. "I mean, have you ever watched a sunrise and felt something inside your chest get warm? Ever seen something so beautiful that alive even when everything else was going wrong?" Arathael considered the question carefully. She had observed many beautiful things during her trip. It was merely an aesthetic judgment. It served no practical purpose. "I do not understand the relevance of phenomena. That's why you don't," Jake said. "We don't fight because or because we think we can win. We fight because there is a universe worth protecting. It's everything. We fight because love, freedom is real and hope is real, even when they don't." The princess felt something shift inside her mind. Lived according to pure logic, based on efficiency and practical outcomes. It suppressed every emotional impulse. But watching these humans, she began pure logic might be missing something important. "To ram my flagship." "What were you thinking about in those final moments?" Eyes grew distant. "I was thinking about my sister Kate, about the sunset over the Pacific. Never see again. We're counting on us to hold just a little longer. I was thinking that if we were going to die anyway, we might as well die for something that mattered." Zarathiel stood alone in her quarters and tried to imagine what it would feel like to care about something who would die for it. She tried a sister like Kate or friends like Amy, and she tried to understand what it meant to fight for love instead of. For the first time in her long life, the composed something crack in the wall of the she had built around her heart. Princess Zarathiel received news. Her communications officer approached her with a worried expression. Of the ship repairs. "Princess, we reports from the fleet commanders with Earth forces. The situation has." Zarathiel felt a familiar surge. Military operations should be straightforward when you had superior technology. Defying complicated commands. Humans have launched what they call Operation Stand. Instead of surrendering after losing their main fleet, fighting harder than before. Admiral the remaining Earth forces and is using cannot predict. Something cold in her stomach when she heard that name. Sister. He had mentioned during their conversations, always perfection. What exactly are these unpredictable tactics? Ramming a one that damaged our flagship. Human pilots directly into our vessels. And they are converting civilian transports into massive bombs. Ground forces are fighting building to building in cities we have already declared secured. Our casualties are mounting higher than expected. Zarathiel walked to the nearest tactical display and studied the reports coming in from the battle zone. The numbers made no sense from a military perspective. Human forces were outnumbered 20-1 and outgunned by an even larger margin. Any rational enemy would have sued for peace after losing 90% of their fleet. Our field commanders are requesting guidance, Princess. They report that human behavior is becoming increasingly erratic. Wounded soldiers continue fighting until they die. Pilots manually override their ship computers to perform suicide attacks. Civilians are taking up arms and attacking our ground troops. Show me the tactical analysis, Zarathiel ordered. The display filled with battlefield reports that painted a picture of organized chaos. Human units were abandoning defensive positions only to attack from unexpected directions. Ships with critical damage were being used as weapons instead of being abandoned. Even human medical personnel were fighting when their hospitals were threatened. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared to be coordinating this madness from a heavily damaged command ship that should have been evacuated days ago. Her forces were scattered across 3 star systems, but somehow still working together. Every time Valdorian commanders thought they had cornered a human unit, it would either disappear or explode. This makes no sense, one of her tactical advisors said. They cannot win this battle. Why do they continue to throw away lives for no strategic gain? Zarathiel thought about her conversations with Jake Martinez, about Lieutenant Amy Foster, holding Luna Station for 3 days, about Sergeant Ben Clark carrying wounded soldiers to safety, about Dr. Lisa Parker staying behind to save others. These humans did not fight for strategic gain. They fought for something her people had never understood. Commander, open a channel to the human prisoners. I need to speak with Captain Martinez. Immediately. Jake appeared on the communication screen, looking tired but alert. Behind him, she could see his crew members gathered around, listening to their conversation. Princess, I heard you wanted to talk. Let me guess. Your people are having trouble with my sister Kate. Captain Sullivan is conducting military operations that defy logical analysis. Our strategists cannot predict her next moves because her tactics serve no apparent strategic purpose. Perhaps you can explain why your people are fighting a battle they cannot win. Jake smiled, and for the first time since his capture it was not a gentle expression. Princess, let me tell you something about Kate. When we were kids, she once fought 3 boys who were bullying a smaller child. She knew she was going to lose, but she fought them anyway because it was the right thing to do. She's always been like that. She fights for people who can't fight for themselves. But Captain, this is not a playground dispute. This is a military engagement with clearly defined parameters. Your sister is ordering tactics that will result in maximum casualties for minimal gain. You still don't get it, do you? Jake said. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. Kate isn't trying to win this battle. She's trying to make sure you remember it. Every Valdorian soldier who goes home is going to have nightmares about the humans who refuse to quit. Every time your people look at the stars, they're going to wonder if there are more of us out there somewhere. Zarathiel felt that cold sensation in her stomach grow stronger. Captain, you cannot seriously believe that making us remember you is worth the lives being lost. Princess, Jake said, let me ask you something. Before you came to Earth, how many species had ever damaged your flagship? How many enemies had ever made you question your tactics? How many people had ever made you think about what you're really fighting for? The questions hit her like physical blows. In 200 years of conquest, the Valdorian Empire had never faced serious resistance. Most worlds surrendered after a brief demonstration of superior firepower. Those that fought were quickly overwhelmed by standard tactics. No enemy had ever forced them to adapt or reconsider their methods. "You want to know why we're still fighting?" Jake continued. "Because every human knows that even if we lose, we're going to make you work for it. We're going to cost you ships and soldiers. And time. We're going to make this invasion so expensive that other species will hear about it and maybe decide to fight back too." For the first time in her life, Princess Zerathil felt afraid. Not afraid of death, which was a simple biological function, but afraid of something she could not control or predict. These humans fought with a desperation that transcended normal military calculation. They were willing to die not just for victory, but for the mere chance to inflict damage on their enemies. "Captain, your people are sacrificing themselves for spite. That is not noble or heroic. It is simply waste." Jake's expression grew serious. "Prince's spite is all we have left. When someone stronger than you tries to take away everything you care about, spite is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. We can't beat you with technology or numbers, but we can make sure you never forget the cost of taking our world." The communication ended, leaving Zerathil alone with thoughts she did not want to think. She had always believed that superior technology and logical tactics would overcome any resistance. She had never considered what happened when you faced an enemy that fought not to win, but simply to hurt you as much as possible before dying. Reports continued to arrive from the battle zone. Human forces were conducting simultaneous attacks across multiple systems, stretching Valdorian resources. Thin, damaged ships were being converted into bombs and piloted by volunteer crews. Ground forces were using civilian areas as fortified positions, forcing the aliens to choose between heavy casualties and destroying the very cities they wanted to capture. Admiral Kate Sullivan seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating attacks. That made no sense individually, but created maximum chaos when combined. Her forces were dying by the thousands, but they were taking Valdorian ships and soldiers with them at a rate that shocked the alien high command. That night, Zerathil stood on her damaged bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Kate Sullivan was planning her next impossible attack. Somewhere human pilots were volunteering for suicide missions. Somewhere soldiers were choosing to fight in battles they could not win simply because giving up was not in their nature. The first time, the princess began to understand what Jake had been trying to tell her about the difference between strength and power. The Valdorian Empire had power, but these humans had something else. Something that could not be measured in ships or weapons or technology. Something that made them dangerous, even when they were defeated. 3 weeks after the collision, Princess Zerathil received orders that she had been expecting but dreading. The communication came directly from the Valdorian High Command, with the authority of the Emperor himself. "Princess Zerathil, you are hereby ordered to execute all human prisoners immediately and begin orbital bombardment of remaining Earth cities. This conflict has continued beyond acceptable parameters and is becoming a drain on Imperial resources. The human species has proven too unpredictable to be integrated into the Empire. Complete extermination is now authorized." Zerathil read the orders twice to make sure she understood them correctly. The Empire had decided that humans were simply too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Their refusal to follow normal patterns of conquest and surrender posed a threat to the established order of the galaxy. Her military advisors gathered on the bridge to discuss implementation of the new orders. Commander Veltar, who served as her chief tactical officer, was particularly enthusiastic about the directive. "Finally, the High Command has recognized the threat these creatures represent," he said. "Their irrational behavior is infectious. If Other species learn that resistance is possible. It could destabilize our entire system of control. Better to eliminate them completely than risk that outcome. Admiral Mordith nodded in agreement. The princess should also consider broadcasting the executions to the remaining human forces. Perhaps seeing their captured comrades die will finally break their will to resist. Zaravil listened to her advisors plan the most efficient methods of execution and orbital bombardment. They discussed it with the same calm professionalism they brought to any military operation. To them, this was simply another problem to be solved through the application of superior force. But the princess found herself thinking about her conversations with Jake Martinez over the past weeks. She remembered his stories about Lieutenant Amy Foster and Sergeant Ben Clark and Dr. Lisa Parker. She thought about his sister Kate, who was still fighting impossible battles across 3 star systems. She wondered what it would feel like to care about something so much that you would die for it. "Princess," Commander Veltar said, "shall we proceed with the executions? The sooner we eliminate these prisoners, the sooner we can focus on completing the orbital bombardment." "I need to speak with the prisoners first," Zarathil said. "There may be intelligence value in final interrogations before we carry out the sentence." Her advisors looked puzzled, but did not argue. The princess made her way to the holding area where the human prisoners had spent the last 3 weeks. She found them gathered in their usual circle talking quietly among themselves. Jake looked up when she entered. "Princess," he said calmly, "you look troubled. I'm guessing you got some new orders from your bosses. Captain Martinez, I have been ordered to execute you and your crew immediately. Afterwards, we will begin bombing Earth's remaining cities until all human life is extinguished. The Empire has decided that your species poses too great a threat to be allowed to survive." Jake nodded slowly as if he had been expecting this news. Around him, his crew members showed various reactions. Some looked afraid, while others seemed almost relieved that the waiting was over. But none of them begged for mercy or tried to bargain for their lives. "Well, Princess," Jake said, "I guess this is it then. Before you carry out those orders, though, I want to ask you something. In all the time we've talked, have you ever heard me or any of my people express hatred for you personally?" The question surprised her. "No, Captain. You have been respectful in all our interactions despite your situation." "That's because we don't hate you," Jake said. "We hate what you represent. We hate the idea that strength gives you the right to dominate others. We hate the belief that efficient conquest is more important than freedom and dignity. But we don't hate you as individuals." Lieutenant Amy Foster spoke up from where she sat nearby. "Princess, you could have treated us much worse than you did. You could have tortured us for information or used us as hostages. Instead, you gave us medical care and decent food and treated us like prisoners of war instead of animals." Dr. Lisa Parker nodded in agreement. "That tells us that somewhere inside your cold, logical empire, there are still individuals capable of mercy and honor. Maybe not many, but some." Zarathiel felt that strange sensation in her chest again. These humans were about to die, and instead of cursing her, they were acknowledging her small kindnesses. They faced execution with the same calm dignity they had shown throughout their captivity. "Captain," she said quietly, "I must ask you one final question. Knowing what you know now about the outcome of this war, would you still have chosen to ram my flagship? Would you still have sacrificed your life and the lives of your crew for a cause you knew was hopeless?" Jake stood up slowly and looked her directly in the eyes. "Princess, let me tell you something I've learned. The measure of a person isn't whether they win or lose. It's how they choose to face the impossible. Yes, I would do it again. Not because I thought we could win, but because some things are worth standing up for, even when you know you're going to fall." "But why?" Zarathiel asked. "What possible purpose does it serve to die for a lost cause?" "Because maybe someday someone Like you will remember us and ask herself why we were willing to die rather than kneel. Maybe she'll wonder what we saw in freedom and dignity that was worth more than life itself. Maybe she'll start to understand that being strong doesn't mean you have the right to crush everyone weaker than you. The princess stared at him for a long moment. In 3 weeks of conversation, this stubborn human soldier had challenged every assumption she had about strength and power and victory. He had shown her that there were forms of courage she had never imagined and kinds of honor that had nothing to do with military success. "Princess," Jake said softly, "you know what the real tragedy is? Your people are strong enough to rule the galaxy, but you've forgotten how to fight for something bigger than victory. You've forgotten what it means to believe in something worth dying for." Zarathiel turned and walked out of the holding area. Her advisors were waiting on the bridge with execution protocols ready for implementation. All she had to do was give the order, and 43 human lives would end. Then the orbital bombardment would begin, and soon there would be no more humans anywhere in the galaxy. "Princess," Commander Valtar said, "are you ready to proceed with the executions?" She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Around her, the bridge crew waited for orders that would end this troublesome war once and for all. Outside the viewports, she could see the blue planet where Kate Sullivan was still fighting her impossible battles. "No," Zarathiel said finally. "Prepare the human prisoners for transport. We are releasing them." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Mordith was the first to speak. "Princess, I must protest. We have direct orders from the High Command to execute these prisoners immediately." "The orders are rescinded," she said with authority. She had never felt before. "Open a channel to all ships in the fleet. We are withdrawing from Earth space immediately." "Princess, this is madness," Commander Veltar objected. "The Empire will not tolerate such insubordination. You will be stripped of rank and probably executed yourself." Zarathiel looked at her shocked advisors and smiled. For the first time in her 200 years of life, she was acting not from logic or duty, but from something she had learned from a stubborn human soldier. "Then I suppose I'll finally understand what it means to die for something I believe in." An hour later, Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of a small Valdorian transport ship with his surviving crew. Through the viewports, he could see Princess Zarathiel's flagship growing smaller as they approached Earth space. The alien fleet was already beginning its withdrawal from the system. "Captain," Amy Foster said, "do you think she'd be all right?" "The princess, I mean." Jake thought about the composed alien woman who had questioned him for 3 weeks and slowly learned to see humans as something more than tactical problems to be solved. "I think she's going to be fine, Amy. I think she finally figured out what's worth fighting for." As their small ship entered Earth's communication range, Jake contacted his sister Kate to let her know the war was over. When her face appeared on the screen, she looked tired and battle-worn, but her smile was brighter than any star. "Jake," she said, "you stubborn fool. We thought you were dead." "Not yet, sis," he replied, "though it was a close thing. How are things down there?" "Better now that the aliens are leaving. The whole fleet just jumped to hyperspace about an hour ago. No explanation, just gone. Any idea what changed their minds?" Jake looked back toward where the Valdorian flagship had disappeared into the darkness between stars. Somewhere out there, Princess Zarathiel was probably facing the consequences of choosing mercy over military doctrine. Somewhere she was learning what it meant to fight for something bigger than victory. "I think they finally met someone worth learning from," he said.